Hi, good morning everybody. This is Jean here. This is part 3 of my Joseph's coat. You've seen part 1 and 2, me discovering it, putting the borders on. Part 2 was ironing it, trying to get it flat as possible because it's a mess. If you're just tuning in, this quilt top I made 10, 12, 13 years ago, and it's not one bit of straight seams, curved mess. And I got it out and I'm going to finish it, hopefully, to the best of my ability. Trying to troubleshoot all sorts of problems that I had with my quilt in my inexperience. As you refer back to part 2, I ironed it. I just ironed it flat. And as I was saying in part 2, the act of just ironing fabric, it's not concrete, it's going to flatten. But when you bring it back, that bit, if it's not going to lay flat, is going to ruffle up anyway, as it has done since I took it off my ironing board, and now I'm going to baste it. But a couple of things about me putting my quilt sandwich together. With this particular quilt, I had mentioned that I had bought, or I had had in my stash, this fabric here, which is a real pretty pink with like a tan chandelier print. I don't have enough. I needed quite a lot for this very large quilt. So I bit the bullet and I took a coupon to Joann Fabrics, and I actually got, and I don't usually use it, I actually got extra wide backing fabric. Considering, I got a couple yards of it, and considering how wide it is, I think 110, it's going to do the trick. I don't usually buy it. I usually piece my backings. I usually use my yardage and piece it. But this, I thought, and it's a pink. I just saw it and I'm like, I just want to not get the quilt over and done with, but I just want to hurry this process along. So I bought the backing with a coupon. So what I've done is I have the backing fabric is about 110 wide, and my quilt's about 105. The batting that I have is 90 inches. So I'm not worried about when I get to the other end. This is how I do my quilts, a large quilt. I'll start at one end, and I'm not worried about the other side. If I'm short on batting I should say, I'm not going to be short of backing. If I'm short at batting, I will then quilt the whole thing to about 5 or 10 inches away from the other side where it's short. And then when it's all quilted together all the way to that end, almost, I'll attach a piece of batting. Probably I'll take it over, it's a bit ungainly, but I'll take it over to my ironing board, and I use it's called heat press batting tape. And I'll just add a piece of batting on the other side to make it bigger. Then I'll fold the top over and I'll finish quilting it. That's how I address smaller bits of batting. I'm not going to wrestle with my batting right now and try to make it bigger. I will address that. It may be a bit unconventional, but that's how I do it. Now also what I do is, everybody's like, oh, how do you not get pleats in your backing? Well, sometimes I do, but what I do with a quilt this size, excuse me, I will lay my backing on the table as flat as possible. Now the sheer weight of a couple yards of fabric on a table this size, or if you had a folding table, or if you don't have a table, you can go to the library and do it on a table, or a senior center, or a fire hall, or borrow someone's table. The sheer weight of fabric will pull my batting, backing and my backing right off the table. So I can just smooth. And I go to the very edge. This is the very edge of my backing fabric here and my batting. So as I said, and then of course here's my quilt top. As I said, I know that my quilt top will be the size of that backing over there. Again, I might have to add some batting, but I'm going to just work this way out. This is how I do it. Now, as you can see, hopefully my camera will catch it, I ironed it, but when I was ironing it, again, you can refer to episode 97, part 2. When I was ironing it, I ironed folds into it. I ironed tucks and creases and folds because it's not flat, and it sort of popped up. But because I ironed it like that, when I start, everything is straight here. This edge is here, straight on my backing and my batting down here. And I know that there's no tucks. You can feel it. You can feel it. There's no tucks in my backing. My batting is nice and smooth. Now with my pins, I will start pinning. Now usually the rule of thumb is when you're basting a quilt, you start from the inside out. Well, pretty much this here, at the other end of that table, is the inside. So what I'll do is I'll just keep smoothing, smoothing, smoothing as flat as I can to the outside edge my quilt. And where it's flat, I will start pinning. I use large safety pins. And where it's flat, I will just start pinning. And I'm going to let the fabric, I don't want this to get, I don't want the design to get skewed. I don't want to pull it so much that my design, in order to flatten it out, is going all wonky. So I'm just letting the design, how it was constructed, very bad, go where it wants to. And then I'll start pinning, and then when I start to quilt it, I will then take it over to the machine, and again, I'm pinning it, and it's all wonky, this area right here. Well, I'm pinning it as best I can. Then when I go over to the machine and start, I'm going to free motion quilt. Then I will address each block, as it were, in the way that it needs to be addressed, the wonkiness. And if you refer back to my, when I was ironing it, as I said, I ironed tucks and I ironed folds into it. Well, I'm going to follow, but it's straight. It's straight. My quilt top is straight, even though it's bigger in areas and puffier. It's still, the design is straight, and that's what I want. Now, like this bit here, I can see where I actually ironed quite large folds. But if you can see that, I can just, in my quilting process, which I'll take you over to my machine, you can see where I made the folds, made the tucks with my ironing, with my actual iron. So, and as you saw, I put these, I put my borders on. Now again, the way I did these borders is so not how quilters do borders. If you noticed, I just laid a piece of fabric on and I appliqued the edge. When you're making borders, and I'll address this in another video, you actually measure, you don't just rip a hunk of fabric. It looks like I did that. And I did to a certain extent on this one because it is all over the place. But when you're wanting a nice straight quilt, you measure your quilt top, you take 3 different measurements, one through the top, one through the bottom, one through the middle, one through the bottom, and you get an average. Because when you're actually sewing a border on, your bottom fabric is feeding quicker than your top fabric. So you might think, oh, I just, my quilt side is 62 inches. I just measured it, my quilt. And then all of a sudden you cut a piece 62 inches, and all of a sudden you're half an inch out at the end. And you're thinking, well, how did that happen? You need to take an average, but that's for another time. I didn't do that on this quilt. I literally just laid this white fabric down, and it's not going, because of the nature of this actual quilt, which is done years and years ago, and I would almost call this I'm trying to fix an antique quilt. It's all over the place. So I'm just sort of trying to fix it, even though I made it. So I'm just going to continue. Oh, excuse me, I have something in my eye. I'm just going to continue and just sort of pin with all of its tucks and folds where the fabric sort of wants to go. And then I will address all of those tucks and folds when I take it over to my machine. So, and I pretty much, I'm pretty sure that my backing is going to be, again, the weight of this. I'll go around here, I'll pull. Oh, I always make my backing very much, not very much, but larger than my quilt top, because I would rather err on the cautious side and have really quite enough of my backing without having to mess, like, oh, you know, my quilt top is 62 inches by 60 inches or 60 inches by 60 inches. I'll make my backing 62 inches. I don't do that. I make my backing 67 inches. I do. And then I'll make sure, because again, your fiber, your cotton will stretch as you're smoothing everything. This will stretch. And as we've talked before, which I hope it will do in this case, the quilting will shrink the fabric, the threads, but you don't want to have the extra added worry. This is stressful enough with the basting if you've not done it before. Oh my gosh, I get to the end and my backing is too small after you've either spray basted it or sewn basted it or pin basted it. And then you find out your backing is too small. So I always make my backing much larger. I really do. And then I can cut it off and I can use those scraps in yet another scrap quilt. As I said, for the sake of a few inches of fabric, make your backing larger. Make your backing larger. So I'm going to continue this, just flattening out, filled with tucks and folds in quite a few of the places. Again, as I was looking at this, I thought, boy, considering I was a real novice beginner, I did a really decent job. There's only few places where it's absolutely terrible. But I'm going to continue this, smoothing, making sure my backing is nice and smooth, and then I'll be taking it over. This will take me a while, but I'll be taking it over to my machine, and I don't know how I'm going to actually quilt it, but I'll figure that out. And I'll be setting up my handy dandy camera, and I'll be showing you how to do that. So I'm going to finish pin basting my jeans quilt of many colors.